Sarah Mitchell walked through the dimly lit parking garage beneath the shopping mall, her sneakers making soft echoes against the concrete floor. At 52, she moved with a quiet confidence that came from decades of discipline. Though most people who passed her on the street would simply see a woman of average height with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she carried her shopping bags with ease, having just finished picking up supplies for her weekend camping trip. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows between the rows of parked cars. Sarah had always been comfortable in situations that might make others nervous. 25 years in the Navy SEALs had taught her to assess threats quickly and remain calm under pressure. Even now, 5 years into retirement, those instincts remained sharp. She approached her modest sedan, a reliable vehicle that suited her practical nature. As she reached for her keys, she noticed a group of young Marines in civilian clothes near a large pickup truck several spaces away. They were loud, clearly having enjoyed a few drinks at one of the nearby establishments. Sarah recognized the type immediately. Young servicemen blowing off steam, probably on leave or weekend liberty. Their conversation carried across the empty garage. They were talking about their recent deployment, sharing stories and complaints about their commanding officers. Sarah smiled slightly, remembering her own youth and the similar conversations she'd had with her teammates after difficult missions. Some things never changed in military culture. As she opened her trunk to load her bags, one of the Marines noticed her. He was tall and muscular, probably in his early 20s, with the kind of swagger that came from thinking the world owed him respect. His name was Jake Morrison, though Sarah didn't know this yet. He had been a Marine for 3 years and considered himself quite the tough guy among his peers. "Hey, lady," Jake called out, his voice carrying the slight slur of someone who had been drinking. "You're in my spot." Sarah looked around, confused. The parking spaces weren't assigned, and she had parked in a clearly marked regular spot. She glanced back at the young Marine, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm sorry, but this appears to be a public parking space," she said calmly. Jake's friend snickered behind him, and he seemed to take this as encouragement. He strutted over toward Sarah, his chest puffed out with false bravado. The alcohol had clearly amplified his natural arrogance, and he was showing off for his buddies. "Listen, old lady," he said, stopping uncomfortably close to Sarah. "I don't think you heard me right. That's my spot, and I want you to move your piece of junk car right now." Sarah remained perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides. Years of training had taught her to read people quickly, and she could see that this young Marine was looking for a confrontation. She also noted the positions of his 3 friends, who were now watching with interest rather than trying to defuse the situation. "I understand you're upset," Sarah said in the same calm tone she had used to brief mission details to her SEAL team. "But I'm parked legally, and I'll be leaving in just a moment. There's no need for this to escalate." Jake's face reddened, whether from alcohol or anger Sarah couldn't tell. "Escalate? You think you can talk down to me? I'm a United States Marine, lady. I've served my country. What have you ever done except get old and take up space?" The irony wasn't lost on Sarah, but she felt no need to justify herself to this young man. She had learned long ago that some people only understood strength, but she also knew that wisdom often meant avoiding unnecessary confrontations. "I'm sure you're very proud of your service," she replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish loading my car." But Jake wasn't ready to let it go. The combination of alcohol, peer pressure, and his own insecurities had created a volatile situation. He stepped even closer, invading Sarah's personal space in a way that would have intimidated most people. "I don't think you're taking me seriously," he said, his voice growing louder. "Maybe you need a lesson in respect." Sarah's eyes hardened slightly, though her posture remained relaxed. She had dealt with bullies before, both in the military and in civilian life. The key was to remain calm while being prepared for anything. "I respect your service to our country," she said, "but I also expect you to respect other people. Right now, you're behaving like someone who brings shame to that uniform, not honor." This comment hit Jake like a physical blow. His friends shifted uncomfortably behind him, and he felt his authority being challenged in a way he couldn't tolerate. In his mind, this middle-aged woman was disrespecting not just him, but everything he stood for. "You want to see what this Marine can do," he snarled, clenching his fists. Maybe I should show you what happens when someone disrespects our military. Sarah's expression didn't change, but every muscle in her body subtly shifted into readiness. She calculated distances, angles, and potential weapons in the environment. The shopping bags in her hands could be dropped instantly. The car door could provide cover, or be used as a shield. The concrete pillar behind Jake's friends would limit their ability to surround her. "I think you've had too much to drink," she said simply. "Why don't you and your friends call it a night? Go home, get some rest, and tomorrow you can be proud of your service again, instead of embarrassed by your behavior." But Jake was past the point of rational thought. He had committed himself to this confrontation in front of his peers, and backing down now felt impossible. He took another step forward, and Sarah could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he said. "I think it's time someone taught you a lesson about showing proper respect to those who serve." Sarah set her shopping bags down carefully, never taking her eyes off Jake. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, like a cat preparing to spring. 25 years of combat training had taught her to recognize the moment when words stopped working and action became necessary. "Last chance," she said quietly. "Walk away now and we can both forget this happened." Jake's response was to swing his fist toward her face. The punch never landed. Sarah's reaction was so swift and precise that Jake barely registered what happened. One moment he was throwing what he thought would be a devastating right hook, and the next he was face down on the concrete floor of the parking garage, his arm twisted behind his back in a position that sent sharp pain shooting through his shoulder. Sarah had moved like water, flowing around his clumsy attack with the fluid grace that only came from decades of practice. She had redirected his momentum, used his own force against him, and put him down with a technique so clean and efficient that his friends stood frozen in shock. "Don't move," Sarah said calmly, applying just enough pressure to Jake's arm to make her point clear. "This hold can dislocate your shoulder very easily, and I'd rather not have to explain that to the police." Jake groaned against the cold concrete, his face pressed against the oil-stained floor. The alcohol that had made him feel invincible moments before now left him dizzy and confused. He tried to struggle, but Sarah's grip was like iron, and any movement sent fresh waves of pain through his twisted limb. "What the hell?" one of his friends finally managed to stammer. "Did you guys see that?" Sarah looked up at the 3 remaining Marines, her eyes calm but alert. They were all bigger than her, younger and presumably in good physical condition, but they had just watched their most aggressive friend get taken down by a middle-aged woman in about 2 seconds, and none of them seemed eager to test their luck. "Your friend attacked me," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "I defended myself. Now, you all have a choice. You can help him learn from this mistake, or you can make the same mistake yourselves. I really hope you choose wisely." The tallest of Jake's friends, a corporal named Marcus Webb, stepped forward slowly with his hands visible. He was older than the others, probably around 25, and had been in the Marines long enough to recognize when a situation had gone completely sideways. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we don't want any trouble. Jake's been drinking, and he gets stupid when he drinks. We're sorry about this." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's a good start. But your friend here committed assault, and I have every right to call the police and press charges. The question is whether that's going to help him learn from this experience, or just ruin his military career." Jake tried to speak, but his position made it difficult to get much air into his lungs. "Let me up," he wheezed. "I'll sue you for assault." Sarah applied slightly more pressure to his arm, causing him to gasp. "You attacked me, young man. I have the right to defend myself. And judging by the security cameras in this garage, there's going to be clear video evidence of exactly what happened here." For the first time since the confrontation began, Jake felt genuine fear. Not physical fear, though Sarah's grip was certainly making him uncomfortable, but fear for his future. A criminal charge could end his military career before it really started. Even if charges were dropped, this kind of incident could follow him for years. "Please," he said, his voice muffled against the concrete. "I'm sorry. I was drunk. I made a mistake." Sarah considered this for a moment. She had spent enough time in the military to know that good people sometimes made bad decisions, especially when alcohol was involved. She also knew that destroying this young man's career wouldn't really serve any purpose beyond revenge. "Marcus, is it?" she said, addressing the corporal who had spoken. "What unit are you boys with?" "2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, ma'am. We're based at Camp Lejeune, but we're here on weekend liberty." Sarah nodded. She was familiar with the unit and had worked with Marines from that command during joint operations. "And what's your friend's full name and rank?" Marcus hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to his friend and the recognition that this woman seemed to know military protocol better than most civilians. "Lance Corporal Jake Morrison, ma'am." "Thank you." Sarah looked down at Jake, who was still pinned beneath her. "Lance Corporal Morrison, I'm going to let you up now. But if you make any aggressive moves, if you say anything threatening, or if you do anything other than sit quietly and listen, I will put you right back down and we'll wait for the police together. Do you understand?" "Yes," Jake mumbled. Sarah released his arm and stepped back smoothly, maintaining a position that would let her react quickly if needed. Jake slowly pushed himself to his feet, wincing as he rotated his shoulder. His face was red with embarrassment and anger, but the pain in his arm had sobered him up considerably. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and resentment. Nothing about her appearance suggested she should have been able to handle him so easily. She was older, smaller, and appeared to be just an ordinary woman doing her shopping. Yet she had taken him down with a skill that spoke of serious training. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough from being pressed against the concrete. "Someone who has been exactly where you are right now," Sarah replied. "Young, full of pride in my service, convinced that my uniform made me special. The difference is that I learned humility before it cost me everything." Jake's friends gathered closer, clearly curious about this mysterious woman who had just dismantled their tough guy friend with such apparent ease. "You're military?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled slightly. "Was 25 years in the Navy." "Navy?" Jake scoffed, some of his arrogance returning now that he was back on his feet. "What were you, a cook? A clerk? No wonder you had to use dirty tricks." The other Marines looked uncomfortable at Jake's continued hostility, but Sarah just shook her head sadly. "Lance Corporal Morrison, you're about to make another mistake. You're assuming that because I was in the Navy, and because I'm a woman, I couldn't possibly have done anything that would impress you. That kind of thinking is going to limit you for your entire career. Yeah? Well, what did you do that was so special?" Jake demanded. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. She had learned over the years that some people couldn't handle the truth about her background, and others simply wouldn't believe it. But these young Marines needed to understand that their attitudes were not just disrespectful, they were dangerous. "I was a Navy SEAL," she said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Jake's face went through several expressions: disbelief, shock, and finally a kind of sick realization of just how badly he had misjudged the situation. Marcus was the first to recover. "Ma'am, that's incredible. I didn't know women could be SEALs." "They couldn't for most of my career," Sarah explained. "I was part of an experimental program in the early 2000s, very classified, very controversial. I spent 25 years doing things that most people only see in movies." Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into the concrete floor. The woman he had tried to intimidate and assault wasn't just a random civilian. She was quite possibly one of the most lethal individuals he would ever meet. "I don't believe it," he said weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather wallet. She flipped it open to reveal a military ID card that was clearly authentic, along with several other credentials that the Marines couldn't fully read in the dim light of the garage. "Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy, retired," she said. "SEAL Team 6, then later Special Operations Liaison with Marine units in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've probably worked with your unit's parent command more than once." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. Not only had he attacked a decorated veteran, he had attacked someone who outranked him significantly, and who had probably done more in service to their country than he could hope to accomplish in a full career. Marcus snapped to attention automatically. "Ma'am, we are deeply sorry for this incident. Lance Corporal Morrison's behavior is completely unacceptable. Sarah waved him to a more relaxed position. At ease, Corporal. We're all civilians here right now, but your friend needs to understand something important. She turned to face Jake directly, her expression serious but not unkind. Lance Corporal Morrison, you serve in one of the finest military organizations in the world. The Marine Corps has a proud tradition of honor, courage, and commitment, but what you've shown me tonight is none of those things. Jake couldn't meet her eyes. The shame was overwhelming, made worse by the presence of his friends who had watched him get completely humiliated. You attack someone you perceived as weaker than yourself, Sarah continued. You used your size and your gender to try to intimidate someone you thought couldn't fight back. That's not what Marines do. That's what bullies do. I'm sorry, Jake said quietly. Sorry isn't enough, Sarah replied. Sorry is what you say when you accidentally bump into someone. What you did tonight was assault. It was an abuse of everything your uniform stands for. And if I were your commanding officer, you'd be facing court-martial proceedings right now. The words hit home. Jake had known plenty of Marines who had seen their careers ended by stupid decisions made during liberty. He was beginning to understand just how close he had come to joining them. What do you want me to do? He asked. Sarah studied him for a long moment, trying to decide if this young man was worth saving or if he was simply a bully who would continue to be a problem. I want you to think very carefully about why you're really in the Marines, she said finally. Are you there to serve your country and protect people who can't protect themselves, or are you there because you like having power over others? Jake stared at the ground, unable to answer immediately. The question cut deeper than Sarah's physical defense had. For the first time since joining the Marines, he was forced to examine his real motivations. Had he enlisted to serve others, or to feed his own ego? I thought I wanted to serve, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But maybe I just wanted people to respect me. Sarah nodded. It was an honest answer. And honesty was something she could work with. That's human, Jake. Everyone wants respect. But respect has to be earned, not demanded, and it certainly can't be taken by force. She looked at the other 3 Marines, who had been watching this exchange with growing understanding of how serious the situation really was. This is a teachable moment for all of you, she said. You're going to face situations throughout your careers where you have power over civilians. You'll be armed, you'll be trained, and you'll be representing the United States military. How you handle that responsibility will define not just your own character, but how people view our military. Marcus stepped forward again. Ma'am, what Jake did tonight was wrong. We should have stopped him before it got this far. We're all responsible for this. That's leadership thinking, Corporal, Sarah said approvingly. Taking responsibility for your team, even when they make bad decisions, that's going to serve you well as you advance in rank. She turned back to Jake, who was still processing the magnitude of his mistake. Lance Corporal Morrison, I'm going to give you a choice. We can call this incident into your command, and you can face whatever consequences come from that. Or we can handle this differently. What do you mean? Jake asked, looking up with a mixture of hope and suspicion. I mean, you can prove to me that you're worth saving, that you're actually capable of being the kind of Marine that your uniform demands. Sarah walked over to her car and pulled out a small notebook from her glove compartment. She wrote something on a page, tore it out, and handed it to Jake. That's the address of a veterans shelter downtown. They provide housing and support for homeless veterans, many of whom served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some have PTSD, some have addiction issues, some just fell through the cracks after they got out. Jake looked at the address, confused. What am I supposed to do with this? You're going to volunteer there every weekend for the next 6 months. You're going to serve meals, clean bathrooms, listen to stories from veterans who gave everything for this country and got very little in return. You're going to learn what real service looks like. The young Marine's face showed a mixture of emotions. Relief that he might avoid official punishment, but also dread at the prospect of the work Sarah was describing. And if I don't? He asked. Sarah's expression hardened. Then I make some phone calls to people I know at Camp Lejeune, and your commanding officer learns about tonight's activities through official channels. Your choice. Marcus cleared his throat. Ma'am, if it's okay, I'd like to volunteer with him. We're his team. and we should have prevented this from happening." The other two Marines nodded agreement. Sarah smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. "Outstanding. Real Marines take care of each other, and they take care of veterans. You boys might actually have some potential." She pulled out her phone and showed them a contact number. "That's Jennifer Martinez. She runs the volunteer program at the shelter. You tell her that Sarah Mitchell sent you, and she'll put you to work. Don't expect it to be easy, and don't expect to feel good about yourselves right away. Some of these veterans have been failed by the system, failed by their families, and failed by fellow service members. They're not going to trust you immediately." Jake was beginning to understand that this wasn't just community service, it was a form of education that Sarah believed he desperately needed. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why not just turn me in and be done with it?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because 25 years ago I was a lot like you, full of pride, convinced of my own superiority, ready to prove myself against anyone who challenged me. The difference was that I had senior enlisted personnel who channeled that aggression into something productive before it destroyed my career." She leaned against her car, her posture relaxed but her eyes still alert. "I had a chief petty officer named Rodriguez who caught me in a bar fight during my first deployment. Instead of writing me up, he made me spend my liberty time helping at a local orphanage. I hated every minute of it at first." "What changed?" Marcus asked. "I met a kid there, probably 8 years old, whose parents had been killed in the fighting. He had lost everything, but he still smiled when he saw us coming. Still wanted to learn English from us, still believed that American soldiers were there to help people like him." Sarah's voice grew quiet as she remembered. "That boy taught me more about courage and sacrifice than any training exercise ever could. He helped me understand that being a warrior isn't about proving you're tough. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves." Jake felt something shift inside him as he listened. For the first time, he was beginning to understand what real service might look like. "Did you stay in touch with him?" he asked. "I tried. But war is complicated, and not every story has a happy ending." Sarah's expression grew sad for a moment, then refocused. "The point is that experience changed how I approached my career. Instead of looking for fights, I started looking for opportunities to make a difference. It made me a better SEAL, and more importantly, it made me a better person." The parking garage fell silent except for the distant hum of ventilation fans. The 4 Marines stood facing this woman who had just turned what could have been a career-ending incident into a learning opportunity. "There's something else you need to understand," Sarah continued. "What happened here tonight can never happen again. Not with civilians, not with fellow service members, not with anyone. The skills you learn in the military are powerful, and they come with enormous responsibility." She gestured to Jake's still sore shoulder. "I could have seriously injured you tonight. I could have broken bones, torn ligaments, or worse. I chose not to because you're young and stupid, not malicious. But if you ever attack someone again, you might not be so lucky. And more importantly, you might hurt someone who truly doesn't deserve it." Jake nodded solemnly. The pain in his shoulder served as a constant reminder of how quickly the situation had escalated, and how thoroughly he had been outmatched. "I need all of you to understand something," Sarah said, addressing the group. "When you put on that uniform, you're not just representing yourselves. You're representing every Marine who came before you, and every Marine who will come after you. You're representing an institution that has earned respect through centuries of sacrifice and service." She pointed to Jake. "When you tried to bully me tonight, you weren't just being a bad person. You were dishonoring every Marine who died defending the values you were supposed to uphold." The weight of that statement settled on the young Marines like a physical burden. They had all joined the Corps with dreams of honor and glory, but none of them had really considered the depth of responsibility that came with the uniform. "We understand, ma'am," Marcus said. "This won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," Sarah replied, "because next time, I might not be the person you encounter. Next time, it might be someone who presses charges, or someone who fights back in ways that get people seriously hurt." She picked up her shopping bags and opened her car door, signaling that the immediate confrontation was over. "Jake," she said, "I want you to report to that shelter next Saturday morning at 7 a.m. Wear old clothes that you don't mind getting dirty, and bring an attitude of humility because you're going to need it." "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied. For the first time since putting on his Marine uniform, he truly meant it when he said those words. Sarah got into her car and started the engine, then rolled down her window. And boys, learn from this. The military gave you strength and skills, but those gifts come with the obligation to use them responsibly. Don't waste the opportunity to become the kind of men that uniform demands. As she drove away, the four Marines stood in the empty parking garage, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired. They had come out for a night of fun and ended up receiving a lesson in honor that none of them would ever forget. Jake touched his sore shoulder and watched Sarah's taillights disappear up the garage ramp. In a few short minutes, she had dismantled his arrogance, challenged his assumptions, and offered him a path toward becoming something better than he currently was. For the first time in his Marine career, he was truly ready to learn. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell sat in a coffee shop near the veterans' shelter, reviewing reports on her laptop when she noticed a familiar figure through the window. Jake Morrison was crossing the street, carrying a large bag of groceries toward the shelter entrance. But something about him had changed dramatically. Gone was the swagger and arrogance she remembered from that night in the parking garage. This young Marine moved with purpose and humility, stopping to help an elderly homeless veteran who was struggling with a heavy backpack. Sarah watched as Jake not only assisted the man, but engaged him in conversation, clearly listening to whatever story was being shared. She had been checking on Jake's progress periodically through Jennifer Martinez at the shelter. The reports had been encouraging. After a rocky start, the young Marine had thrown himself into the volunteer work with genuine dedication, but seeing him in action was different from hearing about it secondhand. Jennifer Martinez emerged from the shelter and spotted Sarah through the coffee shop window. She waved and pointed toward the entrance, indicating that Sarah should come over. Curious about what Jennifer wanted to show her, Sarah gathered her things and crossed the street. "Perfect timing," Jennifer called out as she approached. "You have to see something." Jennifer led her into the main common area of the shelter, where about 30 veterans were gathered around several tables. Some were eating lunch, others were playing cards, and a few were just sitting quietly. But what caught Sarah's attention was the scene at the far end of the room. Jake was kneeling beside an elderly veteran in a wheelchair, carefully helping the man eat his lunch. The veteran's hands shook severely, probably from Parkinson's disease or medication side effects, making it impossible for him to feed himself independently. Jake was patiently guiding spoonfuls of soup to the man's mouth, pausing between bites to listen to whatever the veteran was saying. "That's Frank Kowalski," Jennifer explained quietly. "Vietnam veteran, 2 Purple Hearts, multiple tours in combat zones. He's been coming here for 3 years, and in all that time he's barely spoken to anyone. The disease has progressed to the point where he needs help with almost everything, and he's been too proud to accept it." Sarah watched as Jake gently wiped Frank's mouth with a napkin, then leaned in to hear something the older man was whispering. "Jake is the first person Frank has allowed to help him eat," Jennifer continued. "And for the past 2 months, Frank has been telling him stories about his time in Vietnam, stories he's never shared with anyone else here." The transformation was remarkable. The young man who had tried to intimidate her in a parking garage was now showing extraordinary patience and compassion to someone who needed help. This wasn't just community service, it was genuine care for a fellow veteran. "How did this happen?" Sarah asked. "It took time," Jennifer explained. "Jake's first few weeks here were rough. He was clearly doing this because he had to, not because he wanted to. Some of the veterans picked up on that attitude and gave him a hard time. But then something changed." She pointed to another veteran sitting nearby, a middle-aged man with obvious signs of trauma and addiction. "That's Tommy Rodriguez, former Army sergeant. 3 tours in Afghanistan. He's been homeless off and on for 5 years, struggling with PTSD and alcohol addiction. About 2 months ago, Tommy had a bad episode. Flashbacks, panic attack, the whole thing. Jake was here when it happened." Sarah could see Tommy glancing over at Jake with clear respect and affection. Most people, when they see someone having a PTSD episode, they either run away or they try to restrain the person. Jake did something different. He sat down next to Tommy and started talking about his own fears and insecurities. Nothing dramatic, just honest conversation about being scared and feeling lost sometimes. Jennifer smiled at the memory. It was exactly what Tommy needed to hear. That he wasn't broken. That his struggles didn't make him less of a man. That even young Marines sometimes felt overwhelmed by life. Sarah watched as Jake finished helping Frank with his lunch and then moved to sit with Tommy. The easy familiarity between them spoke of a genuine friendship that had developed over months of shared service. After that incident with Tommy, Jake started approaching this work differently, Jennifer continued. He stopped seeing it as punishment and started seeing it as an opportunity to learn from people who had given everything for their country. Marcus Webb appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron and carrying a tray of clean dishes. He spotted Sarah and immediately came over, his face lighting up with recognition. "Ma'am, it's great to see you again. Jennifer told us you might stop by." "Corporal Webb," Sarah replied, noting that Marcus also seemed changed by his experiences here. "How has the volunteer work been treating you?" "Life-changing, ma'am. Honestly, I thought I understood what service meant before, but these veterans have taught me things they don't cover in basic training." Sarah looked around the shelter, noting the easy interactions between the 4 young Marines and the older veterans they were serving. It was clear that meaningful relationships had developed on both sides. "Jake's been remarkable," Marcus continued. "At first, I was worried about him. He was angry about having to be here, and some of the veterans could tell. But Frank Kowalski changed everything." "How so?" "Frank took one look at Jake and saw right through his act, called him out on it in front of everyone, told him that if he was going to be here, he needed to decide whether he was going to serve these veterans or just serve time." Marcus paused, watching his friend gently encourage Frank to try another spoonful of soup. Jake could have gotten defensive, could have argued with Frank, or just gone through the motions. Instead, he asked Frank to teach him what real service looked like. Frank's been his mentor ever since. Sarah was impressed. The young Marine who had attacked her 6 months ago had not only learned humility, he had learned to seek wisdom from those who had walked difficult paths before him. "Ma'am," Marcus said, lowering his voice, "I want you to know that what happened that night in the parking garage changed all of us. Not just Jake, but all of us. We realized that we had been acting like the uniform made us special, instead of understanding that it made us responsible." Jake finished with Frank and began walking toward them, his face showing a mixture of nervousness and determination. When he reached Sarah, he came to attention, not the performative attention of someone showing off, but the respectful attention of a subordinate addressing a superior officer. "Commander Mitchell," he said formally, "thank you for coming. At ease, Jake. How are you finding the volunteer work?" Jake's posture relaxed, but his expression remained serious. "It's been the most important thing I've ever done, ma'am. These veterans have taught me more about honor and sacrifice than I ever learned in basic training." "Tell me about Frank," Sarah said, glancing toward the elderly veteran who was now dozing in his wheelchair. Jake's face softened immediately. "Frank is incredible, ma'am. He served 3 tours in Vietnam, saw things that would break most people, and came home to a country that didn't appreciate his service. He's been fighting battles his whole life, in the jungle, against addiction, against poverty, and now against this disease that's taking away his independence." The young Marine paused, clearly emotional as he spoke about his friend. "But he's never lost his dignity, never stopped caring about other people. He's taught me that being tough isn't about how much you can dish out. It's about how much you can endure while still choosing to help others." Sarah was struck by the maturity in Jake's voice. This wasn't the same person who had tried to intimidate her 6 months ago. "Frank told me something last week that I'll never forget," Jake continued. "He said that the measure of a warrior isn't how many enemies he defeats, but how many people he protects, how many lives he makes better through his service." "That's wisdom earned through experience," Sarah replied. "Are you planning to continue volunteering here after your 6 months are up?" "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. This has become more than an obligation. It's become a calling. These veterans deserve better than what they've gotten, and if I can help provide that in some small way, then that's what I want to do with my free time." Jennifer stepped forward. "Jake has been accepted into our formal mentor program. He's going to be working with newly homeless veterans, helping them navigate the system and find resources. It's a big responsibility." "I'm honored by your confidence," Jake said to Jennifer, then turned back to Sarah. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology that's 6 months overdue. What I did that night was inexcusable." I was a bully and a coward, hiding behind my uniform instead of living up to it. Sarah studied the young Marine's face, seeing genuine remorse and growth. Apology accepted, Jake, but more importantly, you've proven that you were worth taking a chance on. You've honored the opportunity you were given. I want you to know that I've written a letter to my commanding officer, confessing what happened that night and explaining how it led to my volunteer work here, Jake said. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from that. This surprised Sarah. Jake was voluntarily risking his career to take responsibility for his actions, even though he could have completed his volunteer service without ever officially reporting the incident. That took courage, she said. What made you decide to do that? Frank helped me understand that integrity means doing the right thing even when it costs you something, especially when it costs you something. I can't be the Marine I want to be while hiding from the Marine I used to be. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This young man had not only learned the lessons she had hoped to teach, he had internalized them and made them part of his character. Jake, she said, I'm proud of who you've become. You've turned a moment of failure into a foundation for growth, and that's exactly what great Marines do. As she prepared to leave the shelter, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them all to this point. A random encounter in a parking garage had led to transformation that none of them could have predicted. Jake had learned humility and service. His friends had learned responsibility and leadership. And the veterans at the shelter had gained dedicated advocates who truly understood their worth. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, they were fought with wisdom, patience, and the belief that people could change for the better when given the chance.